Before I begin my story, I'd like to know where you're all tuning in from. Drop a comment below. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes water is all you have when you're drowning and blood just watches from the shore. My son, David, and my daughter, Sarah, well, they were very good at watching. Especially when I needed them most, like that night, when my calls for help echoed into the silence of their busy lives. They ignored my late-night calls, frantic and terrified as I was. So I did what any mother pushed to the brink would do. I called my lawyer, and then I called the bank, and I made sure they'd have a long, long time to regret treating their mother like an inconvenient piece of old furniture. This is how I made them understand that my life and my legacy were still very much my own. The golden years. That's what they call them, isn't it? For me, Eleanor Vance, widow of Arthur Vance, mother of David and Sarah, those years were supposed to be filled with the quiet hum of a life well lived, the comfort of family, and the peace Arthur and I had worked so tirelessly to build. Arthur, my Arthur, had been gone 5 years now, and the silence in our comfortable, two-story colonial sometimes felt as vast as the prairie sky we'd admired on our anniversary trip to Montana. We'd bought this house when David was just a toddler, and Sarah was a rosy-cheeked surprise still on her way. Every scuff on the banister, every faded patch on the wallpaper in the sunroom, held a memory. I remembered David's triumphant, wobbly first steps right there in the hallway, his little hands gripping my fingers like tiny vices. I remembered Sarah's elaborate tea parties under the old oak tree in the backyard, her serious face as she poured imaginary Earl Grey for her stuffed bear, Barnaby, and me. I'd poured my life into them, into this home. Countless school runs, ballet lessons for Sarah, soccer practice for David, sleepless nights nursing fevers, birthday parties that left glitter in the carpet for weeks. Arthur and I had scrimped and saved, not for lavish holidays or fancy cars, but for their education, for their futures, for the down payments on their own first homes. We wanted them to have a good start, better than we'd had. And they did. David was a successful architect, though he always seemed stressed about money, about keeping up with his wife, Brenda's, rather expensive tastes. Sarah had married well too, to a man named Mark who was pleasant enough, though he mostly just echoed Sarah's opinions. She was a part-time interior designer, a career she'd pursued after her own children, my grandchildren, Emily and James, were old enough for school. I loved Emily and James dearly, though I didn't see them as often as I wished. "We're just so busy, Mom," Sarah would say, her voice always a little too bright, a little too rushed. You know how it is, I didn't know how it was. I remembered being busy, but I also remembered always making time for my own mother, even when it was inconvenient. My health was, well, the health of a 78-year-old woman. I had arthritis that made my hands ache, especially in the damp weather, and a touch of high blood pressure that my doctor, young Dr. Ramirez, kept a close eye on. Nothing immediately alarming, but enough to make me acutely aware of my own mortality, of my increasing vulnerability. I wasn't frail, not yet, but the boundless energy of my youth was a distant memory. Arthur and I had been meticulous about our affairs. Our wills were straightforward, leaving everything to be divided equally between David and Sarah. They knew this. We'd had a family meeting after Arthur passed, a somber affair where our then lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had gently explained the provisions. I remembered David nodding, his expression serious, while Sarah had dabbed at her eyes, though even then, a flicker of something, perhaps calculation, had passed through her gaze when Mr. Henderson mentioned the value of the estate. It was a comfortable sum, not exorbitant, but enough to make a significant difference to their already comfortable lives. The house alone, in this increasingly desirable neighborhood, was worth a pretty penny. In the years since Arthur's passing, the children's visits had become less frequent, their calls shorter. It was always, "Just checking in, Mom, everything okay?" followed by a quick rundown of their own stressful lives, their children's latest achievements, or their upcoming holidays. My life, my quiet days, seemed to hold little interest for them. I was the reliable, ever-present mother, the one who would always be there, presumably content to potter in my garden and knit lopsided scarves for the grandchildren. They never asked about my finances, but I sometimes caught David eyeing the antique grandfather clock in the hall, or Sarah commenting on how well my silver tea service had held its value. Little remarks, like tiny pebbles dropped into a still pond, sending out ripples of unease I tried to ignore. I told myself they were just making conversation, that it was natural for children to think about these things. But a small, cold knot would tighten in my chest. Was that all I was to them now? A collection of assets waiting to be dispersed? I pushed the thought away. They were my children. I loved them. And surely, deep down, they loved me too. They were just busy. That's what I told myself as I watered my roses and waited for the phone to ring. That particular Tuesday started like any other. I'd had my toast and tea, read the morning paper, and spent a couple of hours tending to my small vegetable patch in the backyard. The tomatoes were coming along nicely, plump and red, and I made a mental note to offer some to my neighbor, Agnes Periwinkle, a sprightly woman of 82 who lived across the street and always had a cheerful word and a plate of freshly baked cookies to share. Agnes was more company to me these days than my own flesh and blood, a thought that brought a familiar pang of sadness. As evening drew in, I felt a peculiar tightness in my chest. I dismissed it as indigestion. I'd had a rather rich slice of Agnes's lemon drizzle cake that afternoon. But as the hours passed, the tightness intensified, morphing into a dull, pressing ache that radiated into my left arm. I sat down heavily in my armchair, the one Arthur used to favor, its worn velvet comforting beneath my trembling hands. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my initial denial. This wasn't indigestion. This felt different, more sinister. The digital clock on the mantelpiece glowed 11:37 p.m. It was late, but surely not too late to call my children. My son, David. He lived only 20 minutes away. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with a mixture of pain and rising panic. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times, then voicemail. "David, it's Mom." I managed, my voice thin and reedy. I'm not feeling well, dear. My chest, it really hurts. Could you please call me back? Or maybe come over? I tried to keep the tremor out of my voice, not wanting to sound overly dramatic, a complaint they'd subtly leveled at me before when I'd mentioned loneliness or a minor ailment. I hung up, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. He'd call back. Of course he would. He was probably just asleep, his phone on silent. 10 minutes crawled by, each second stretching into an eternity. The pain was getting worse, a heavy weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. No call from David. With a surge of renewed urgency, I dialed Sarah's number. She lived further away, almost an hour's drive, but she was a lighter sleeper. Or so I thought. Again, the hollow sound of ringing, unanswered. Voicemail. "Sarah, darling, it's Mom." I gasped, the effort of speaking now considerable. "Please, I think I need help. I've tried David, but he's not answering." My chest. I'm really scared. I didn't know what else to say. The raw fear in my own voice startled me. Another 10 minutes. The silence in the house was broken only by the loud ticking of the grandfather clock and my own ragged breathing. A text message pinged on David's phone, which I still held. Hope surged. It was from David. My fingers shook as I opened it. "Mom, it's nearly midnight. Is it urgent? Brenda's finally got the baby to sleep. Unless the house is on fire, can it wait till morning?" The casual cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs more effectively than the pain. The baby. His third child, little Leo, was only 6 months old. Of course, they needed their sleep. But my chest, wasn't this urgent? A few minutes later, another ping.
"Sarah. Mom?
Saw your missed call. Everything okay? Mark and I were watching a movie. Text me if it's an emergency. Signal's a bit patchy for calls here a movie." My daughter was watching a movie while her mother was terrified, possibly having a heart attack. The words swam before my eyes. The pain in my chest was now a relentless, crushing vice. I couldn't wait any longer. They weren't coming. They weren't even properly concerned. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, almost as painful as the sensation in my chest. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. With a shaking hand, I scrolled through my contacts, past their names, my gaze blurring with unshed tears, and found Agnes. Her number. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and blessedly alert. "Eleanor? Is everything all right, dear? You sound breathless, Agnes," I whispered, relief and shame warring within me. I think I need an ambulance." My chest. Agnes didn't hesitate. "Stay on the line, Eleanor. I'm calling one right now from my landline, and I'll be right over." And just like that, help was on its way. Not from my children, who owed me everything, but from a kind neighbor. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow, even as I fought for each breath. The flashing blue lights outside my window were a strange comfort, a sign that someone, at least, considered my distress an emergency. Agnes was there in minutes, her face etched with concern, her surprisingly strong hand gripping mine as the paramedics, a young man and woman with kind, efficient eyes, began their assessment. They asked questions, attached electrodes, administered something under my tongue that tasted metallic and sharp. Vaguely, I heard Agnes explaining that my children were unavailable. The word hung in the air, laden with an unspoken judgment that mirrored my own. I was stabilized and taken to the hospital, the siren wailing a mournful song into the indifferent night. The emergency room was a blur of activity, hushed voices, and the beeping of machines. Tests were run, doctors consulted. It turned out I hadn't had a full-blown heart attack, but something called an unstable angina episode, a serious warning. I needed observation, medication adjustments, and strict instructions to avoid stress. Stress. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was admitted to a cardiac ward for a couple of days. It was mid-morning the next day when David finally called. Not my personal phone, which was still clutched in Agnes's purse back at my house, but the hospital's bedside phone. His voice was tinny, annoyed. "Mom? Agnes called Brenda this morning, said you were in the hospital? What on earth happened? You know I told you not to call so late unless it was a real emergency." His tone was accusatory, as if I deliberately inconvenienced him. "David," I said, my voice weak but steady. "I was having severe chest pains. I thought it was serious." There was a pause.
Oh.
"Well, are you okay now?" Brenda said. Agnes made it sound like you were at death's door. There was no warmth, no real concern, just a hint of exasperation. "The doctors are looking after me," I replied, feeling a profound weariness settle over me. "They said it was serious." "A warning, right? Well, try not to worry then. I've got back-to-back meetings today, but I'll try and pop in this evening if I can get away." Brenda sends her love. He didn't ask if I needed anything. He didn't ask for details. He just wanted to get off the phone. Sarah called an hour later, her voice a little more flustered, but still carrying that undercurrent of inconvenience. "Mom." "Oh my goodness." Agnes left a message. "A heart thing? Are you all right?" Mark and I were so worried when we woke up and saw all the missed calls and texts. We just assumed you'd gone back to sleep, and it was a false alarm after you didn't reply to my text. Assumed. They had assumed. That single word spoke volumes. They hadn't bothered to call back immediately that night, or even first thing in the morning, to ensure their mother, who had reported terrifying chest pains, was actually okay. They waited until Agnes, a neighbor, shamed them into it. "I'm stable now, Sarah," I told her, my voice flat. "The hospital is taking good care of me." "Oh, good. That's a relief. Look, the kids have their school play rehearsal tonight, and Mark has a dinner thing, so it's a bit manic here. Can I come tomorrow? Maybe bring the kids if they allow them? They'd love to see Grandma." Even now, it was about her schedule, her convenience. The offer to bring the children felt like a token gesture, a way to make her visit seem more virtuous. The next 2 days in the hospital were a period of forced rest and bitter reflection. Agnes visited daily, bringing me my robe, some books, and her comforting presence. She'd also retrieved my phone, and I saw the missed calls from the previous night, David's dismissive text, Sarah's indifferent one. Seeing them again, in the stark light of day, solidified the painful truth. My children's concern for me was conditional, superficial. It existed only when it didn't clash with their own lives, their own priorities. I remembered all the times I dropped everything for them. The time David had broken his arm playing football, and I'd sat with him in the emergency room for 6 hours, Arthur pacing outside. The time Sarah had her heart broken by her first serious boyfriend, and I'd held her while she cried for an entire weekend, canceling my own plans without a second thought. I remembered the financial sacrifices, the dreams deferred, the quiet anxieties Arthur and I had shared about making ends meet while ensuring they never wanted for anything essential. And this was the return on that lifelong investment of love and care? A dismissive text message during a medical emergency? An assumption that I was merely being dramatic? On the day I was discharged, David did manage to pop in for 15 minutes on his way home from work. He looked harried, checked his watch twice, and offered a perfunctory, "Glad you're feeling better, Mom. Try to take it easy, okay? Don't want any more scares like that." He patted my hand awkwardly. Sarah arrived the following afternoon, children in tow, who were restless and bored within minutes. She spent most of the visit scrolling through her phone, occasionally asking, "You're sure you're all right, Mom? You look a bit pale." It was during that visit that the last straw, as they say, was placed. While Sarah was in my kitchen making tea, ostensibly for me but mostly, I suspected, to check the state of my housekeeping, I overheard her on the phone to Mark, her voice low but audible. "Yes, she's fine, just a bit shaken. Honestly, Mark, I think she panics easily these days. You know how old people get. And this house, it's really too big for her. We should probably start having that conversation soon for her own good. Of course, for her own good. The euphemism for, we want the inheritance, and managing her in her own home is becoming a bother." That cold, calculating phrase, uttered so casually, was like a shard of ice piercing my already wounded heart. It wasn't just neglect anymore. It was a gentle, familial form of predation. They were already circling, waiting. And in that moment, the hurt, the deep, aching hurt, began to curdle into something else. Something hard and resolute. The days following my return home were quiet, but my mind was anything but. Sarah's overheard words replayed endlessly, each syllable a fresh twist of the knife. For her own good, the hypocrisy was breathtaking. Their neglect had nearly cost me dearly, and now they were contemplating how to manage my decline for their convenience, cloaking their avarice in a thin veneer of concern. The seed of resolve, initially a tiny, hesitant sprout in the barren ground of my despair, began to take root, drawing strength from the rich soil of remembered slights and sacrifices. It was no longer just about the ignored calls. It was about a lifetime of taking, of expecting, of assuming my resources, emotional, temporal, and financial, were theirs by right. I sat in Arthur's armchair, the one where my crisis had begun, and looked around my living room. Every object told a story, not just of my life with Arthur, but of the life we'd built for our children. The slightly worn Persian rug, a wedding gift from Arthur's parents, had been the stage for countless childhood games. The bookshelf crammed with novels and photo albums chronicled decades of family life. This house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the repository of my entire adult life, my love, my labor. And they saw it as an asset, something to be liquidated and divided. The thought filled me with a cold fury I hadn't known I possessed. Arthur had always said I was stronger than I thought. "Eleanor, my love," he'd often say, his eyes twinkling, "you have a spine of tempered steel beneath that gentle exterior. Don't ever let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness." For too long, I had allowed their casual disregard to chip away at my sense of self-worth, making excuses for them, blaming their busy lives no more. My mind drifted back to Arthur, to his pragmatism, his quiet wisdom. He'd been a meticulous planner, a believer in foresight and prudence. "Always have a plan, Eleanor," he'd advise, "and always have a backup plan." He wouldn't have stood for this. He would have been appalled by their behavior, by their thinly veiled greed. He would have expected me to protect myself, to protect what we had built together. The idea of changing my will, which had flickered briefly in the hospital, now began to burn with a steady flame. Why should David and Sarah inherit the fruits of our lifelong labor when they couldn't even be bothered to answer a phone call in a genuine emergency? When they viewed me more as a declining asset than a mother who needed care and respect? What had they done to deserve such a significant windfall? The answer, stark and unwelcome, was very little. In fact, their recent actions had demonstrated quite the opposite. They had, in their careless entitlement, forfeited any moral claim to my estate. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice. It was about asserting my own value, my own agency, in the face of their profound disrespect. It was about ensuring that my legacy, the final statement of my life, reflected my true wishes and values, not their grasping expectations. I thought of Agnes, her unwavering kindness, her immediate response to my distress. She expected nothing from me, yet she gave so freely of her time and compassion. I thought of the local animal shelter Arthur and I used to support, a place that brought comfort to so many abandoned creatures. Were these not more deserving recipients of our hard-earned money than two adult children who couldn't even feign concern? The resolve hardened within me. I would not go gentle into that good night, not while my legacy was at stake. I would not be a passive participant in the premature disposal of my life and assets. I would take control. The first step, I knew, was to seek proper legal counsel. Mr. Henderson, our old family lawyer, had retired years ago. I needed someone sharp, someone discreet, someone who would understand. And then I remembered. Arthur, a few years before he passed, had mentioned a lawyer who'd helped a colleague of his with a complicated estate matter. Monica Pritchard, he'd said, tapping his pen thoughtfully. Sharp as a tack, that one, and fair. Remember that name, Eleanor, just in case, just in case. Arthur, always looking ahead. I found her details online. Monica Pritchard, specializing in estate planning and elder law. It felt like a sign. The fear I'd felt that night of the ignored calls was still there, a dull ache in my memory, but now it was overlaid with a new emotion, a steely determination. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my maternal love for an endless well of forbearance. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The decision to call Monica Pritchard felt like crossing a significant threshold. It was one thing to feel anger and resolve. It was another to take concrete action. My hand hovered over the phone for a moment, a flicker of old anxieties. What if the children found out? What if this caused an irreparable rift? But then I remembered Sarah's dismissive voice. You know how old people get, and David's irritated text. Can it wait till morning? The memory firmed my resolve. An irreparable rift? They had already created it with their indifference. I was merely acknowledging its existence. I dialed the number for Pritchard and Associates. A calm, professional voice answered, and I requested an appointment with Ms. Pritchard, stating it was regarding a personal estate matter. An appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The intervening days were a strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation. I told no one, not even Agnes, though she did remark one afternoon over tea that I seemed more focused, more like my old self. I suppose the weight of indecision had lifted, replaced by the clarity of purpose. I spent time gathering my financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, the deeds to the house, a copy of my existing will. Laying them out on the dining room table, the sheer volume of paperwork was a testament to a lifetime of careful management by Arthur and myself. This wasn't just money. It was security, independence, the culmination of years of hard work and prudent choices. And it was mine. Mine to do with as I saw fit. On Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a smart navy blue dress Arthur had always liked. I wanted to feel composed, in control. Monica Pritchard's office was in a modern building downtown, a far cry from old Mr. Henderson's dusty, book-lined rooms. The reception area was sleek, minimalist, with abstract art on the walls. I felt a little out of my depth, but I clutched my handbag, papers neatly filed inside, and reminded myself why I was there. Monica Pritchard was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 40s, with intelligent, assessing eyes and a firm handshake. She exuded an air of quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. She led me into a comfortable office with a large window overlooking the city. "Mrs. Vance," she began, her voice calm and inviting. "Thank you for coming in. Please tell me how I can help you." I took a deep breath. And then I told her everything. I started with Arthur's passing, my relationship with my children, their increasing distance. I recounted, with as much composure as I could muster, the events of that dreadful Tuesday night, the chest pains, the fear, the unanswered calls, the dismissive texts. I told her about their perfunctory visits in the hospital, David's impatience, Sarah's overheard comment about the house being too big for her. As I spoke, Monica listened intently, her expression neutral, but not unsympathetic. She didn't interrupt, save for an occasional clarifying question. It was a relief to unburden myself to someone impartial, someone who wouldn't judge or make excuses for my children. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Monica leaned back slightly in her chair. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "that sounds like a deeply painful and disillusioning experience. It's clear your children's actions, or lack thereof, have caused you significant distress and have led you to reconsider your estate plans." I nodded, a lump in my throat. "It's not just about the money, Miss Pritchard," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It's about respect. It's about feeling valued. They see me as an obligation, a fading resource. They're waiting for me to be gone, so they can claim what Arthur and I worked for." Monica's gaze was understanding. "It's a situation we unfortunately see more often than you might think," she said quietly. "Entitlement can be a powerful and destructive force within families. You have every right to decide how your assets are distributed. Your will is your testament, your final word. It should reflect your wishes, not the expectations of others." Her words were like a balm to my bruised spirit. She then began to outline my options, clearly and concisely. "You can, of course, amend your current will to change the beneficiaries entirely. You could disinherit your children, or significantly reduce their share, and leave your estate to other individuals, to charities, or a combination thereof. Another option, which offers more control during your lifetime and can protect assets, is to establish a revocable living trust. You would transfer your assets into the trust. You would be the trustee, meaning you retain full control, and you would designate successor trustees and beneficiaries. This also has the benefit of avoiding probate, which can sometimes be a lengthy and public process." She explained the mechanisms of a trust, how I could stipulate conditions, how I could provide for my own care if I became incapacitated, ensuring my wishes were followed, not someone else's interpretation of my own good. She spoke of asset protection, of ensuring my final wishes were ironclad. "We can structure it," she explained, "so that you remain in complete control of your finances and property for as long as you are able. You can amend or revoke the trust at any time. The key is that it allows you to clearly define who benefits and under what circumstances." The idea of a revocable living trust appealed to me immensely. It wasn't just about denying David and Sarah. It was about actively directing my legacy. It felt proactive, empowering. "What about challenging it?" I asked, voicing a lingering fear. "Can they try to say I wasn't of sound mind?" Monica smiled faintly. "That's always a possibility disgruntled relatives might attempt. However, we take steps to mitigate that. We would ensure you undergo a capacity assessment with a qualified medical professional, if necessary, though our detailed discussions today, your clear articulation of your wishes and reasons, already go a long way. We document everything meticulously. The fact that you are initiating this proactively, with clear reasoning based on recent events, strengthens your position considerably." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Monica answered all my questions patiently, explaining complex legal terms in plain English. She never once tried to sway my decision, only to inform and empower me. By the time I left her office, the apprehension had largely dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of clarity and purpose. I knew what I had to do. Monica had given me the tools, the legal framework, to reclaim my autonomy and dictate the terms of my own legacy. Arthur would have approved. He would have admired Monica's sharp mind and straightforward approach. As I stepped out into the bright afternoon sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years. The first, most difficult step had been taken. The weeks that followed my initial consultation with Monica Pritchard were a period of quiet, meticulous activity. I had made my decision. I would establish the Eleanor Vance Revocable Living Trust. My primary beneficiaries would no longer be David and Sarah. Instead, the bulk of my estate would be divided between the local animal shelter that Arthur and I had so admired, the Havenwood Animal Sanctuary, and a scholarship fund for underprivileged nursing students at the community college, a nod to the kind, efficient care I'd received during my brief hospital stay. And for Agnes Periwinkle, my dear, loyal neighbor, I decided to leave a significant sum, enough to ensure her own comfort and recognize her selfless friendship. It wasn't charity, it was a heartfelt acknowledgement of her goodness. For David and Sarah, I wrestled with this. A part of me, the wounded mother, wanted to cut them out entirely. But another, perhaps more pragmatic part, guided by Monica's counsel on minimizing potential challenges, suggested a different approach. We decided they would each receive a token amount, a sum large enough that they couldn't easily claim they were forgotten by mistake, but small enough to send a clear message. $10,000 each. A fraction of what they had clearly been expecting. And even this modest sum would come with a stipulation. It would be payable only upon their provision of undisputed proof that they had visited me at least once a month, for a minimum of 2 hours per visit, for the 12 consecutive months prior to my passing, and that these visits were for companionship, not for discussing my finances or property. Monica had called it the genuine care clause. It was, we both knew, a condition they were unlikely to meet given their current track record, but it elegantly underscored the reason for my decision. The process of transferring assets into the trust was more involved than I'd anticipated. There were forms to sign, deeds to be retitled, investment accounts to be redesignated. Monica and her efficient paralegal, a pleasant young woman named Chloe, guided me through every step. I had to visit my bank, the very same bank where my children likely imagined their inheritance was safely accumulating. I met with a polite bank manager, Mr. Davies, who assisted me in retitling my accounts to the name of the trust. He asked no questions, his professionalism a welcome contrast to my children's intrusive speculations. Each signature felt like a small act of defiance, a quiet assertion of my will. During this period, my interactions with David and Sarah continued their established pattern of benign neglect. David called occasionally, usually when he was driving, the conversations brief and superficial. Just checking in, Mom. Everything all right? Keeping up with your meds? He never mentioned my hospital stay beyond that first brief inquiry. Sarah would send sporadic texts with pictures of the grandchildren, often followed by a subtle hint about an upcoming school expense or a desired family holiday they were trying to save up for. I responded politely, noncommittally. They remained blissfully unaware of the seismic shifts occurring beneath the surface of my quiet life. Their obliviousness was, in a strange way, a constant affirmation of my decision. If they truly cared, wouldn't they notice a change in me? Wouldn't they make more of an effort, especially after my health scare? But no. Their lives, their needs, remained paramount. I made a few test calls, as I'd mentally dubbed them. One afternoon I called David. "David, dear," I said, trying to sound a little frail, "my garden gate seems to have come off its hinges. I'm worried about security. Would you perhaps have a moment this weekend to take a look at it for me?" There was a sigh on the other end of the line. "Mom, I'm swamped this weekend. Brenda's parents are coming over. Can't you just call a handyman? I'll transfer some money if that's the issue." It wasn't about the money. It was about his son helping his elderly mother. His immediate resort to a financial solution for a practical problem spoke volumes. Another day, I called Sarah. "Sarah, darling, I was thinking of sorting through some of Arthur's old photographs. There are so many, and my eyes aren't what they used to be. I wondered if you might like to come over and help me, perhaps share some memories?" "Oh, Mom, that sounds lovely," she said, her voice strained. "But this week is just impossible. Emily has her dance recital, and James has a soccer tournament. And Mark and I were hoping to get away for a night, just us. Maybe another time? Send me some snaps on my phone, if you sort any good ones." Each dismissal, each casual brush-off, chipped away at any lingering guilt I might have felt. They were, with their own actions, validating my choices, reinforcing the necessity of the path I had taken. Monica had advised me to keep a journal, noting my reasons, my feelings, and any interactions that underscored my decision. I did so diligently, writing in a simple notebook each evening. It became a chronicle of my journey from hurt to empowerment. There were moments of sadness, of course. Looking at old photographs of David and Sarah as children, their innocent faces beaming up at me, I would feel a pang of loss for the relationship I thought we had, the one I had cherished. But then I would remember Sarah's words, for her own good, and the sadness would be replaced by a cool, clear resolve. This wasn't just about protecting my assets. It was about protecting my dignity, my autonomy. It was about ensuring that my final act in this world would be one of self-respect and considered judgment, not one of passive surrender to the entitled expectations of others. The paperwork was finally completed. The Eleanor Vance Revocable Living Trust was fully established, its terms ironclad, its executor, Monica Pritchard herself, in consultation with Agnes if needed for personal matters, fully briefed. I felt a sense of profound, quiet satisfaction. I had taken control of my narrative, of my legacy. The stage was set. All that remained was for the curtain to rise on their dawning realization. The opportunity to inform David and Sarah of the new arrangements presented itself sooner than I had anticipated, and in a way that perfectly underscored their prevailing attitudes. It was a Saturday morning, about a month after the trust was finalized. I received a call from David, his voice unusually brisk and purposeful. "Mom, Brenda, and I were thinking of driving over this afternoon. There's something we'd like to discuss with you. About the house." My heart gave a little flutter. So, Sarah's musings about the house being too big for me had progressed to active planning. "Oh," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What about the house, dear?" "Well, it's a big place for one person. And with your little health scare a while back, Brenda and I were thinking perhaps it's time to consider options. Maybe a nice retirement community? Or even, there's that lovely new assisted living place near us. We could help you with the move, sort things out." His tone was smooth, almost unctuous, the concern laid on a little too thick. Sarah, he informed me, would be joining them. A united front. Clearly, they had been conferring. "That's the thought, David," I replied. "Why don't you come over around 2? We can have some tea and talk about it." I hung up, a grim smile playing on my lips. They were walking right into it. Their timing was impeccable. When they arrived, David was all solicitous charm, while Sarah fussed over me, plumping cushions and commenting on how tired I looked. Brenda, David's wife, who I always felt looked at my possessions with a keenly appraising eye, chimed in with supportive murmurs about making things easier for me. We sat in the living room, the one they were subtly trying to ease me out of. I served tea in my good china, the silver tea service Sarah so admired gleaming on the mahogany coffee table. After the initial pleasantries, David cleared his throat. "So, Mom, as I mentioned on the phone, we've been doing some thinking. For your own good, really." There was again that odious phrase. "This house, it's a lot of upkeep. And after your episode, we're worried about you being here all alone," Sarah chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "Exactly, Mom. We just want you to be safe and comfortable. We found this wonderful place, Willow Creek Meadows, not far from David and Brenda. It has on-site nursing activities, you'd make new friends, and," Brenda added a little too brightly, "it would free up the equity in this house. You could use that to live very comfortably at Willow Creek, and, well, it would simplify things for the future too." Simplify things for them, she meant. I let them talk, outlining their vision for my managed decline, their careful plans for my assets. They spoke of downsizing, of selling my furniture. "You wouldn't need all this old stuff, Mom," of how much less stress it would be for me. I listened patiently, my gaze calm, my hands resting quietly in my lap. When they finally wound down, expecting my grateful acquiescence, I took a slow sip of my tea. "Well," I began, my voice measured and clear, "it seems you've given this a great deal of thought. Your concern for my welfare is noted." David beamed, mistaking my composure for agreement. "We knew you'd see sense, Mom. However," I continued, my voice hardening slightly, You seem to be operating under a few misapprehensions, particularly regarding this house and, well, my assets in general." A flicker of uncertainty crossed David's face. Sarah frowned. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean," I said, looking directly at them, "that the night I lay in this very room, terrified and in pain, trying desperately to reach either of you, was something of an epiphany for me. Your subsequent responses, or lack thereof, were also illuminating." David started to bluster. "Now, Mom, we explained that. You explained nothing that excused your neglect." I cut him off, my voice gaining strength. "But it did make me think. It made me think very hard about my life, my future, and my legacy. So, I took some advice. I called my lawyer, Monica Pritchard, a very capable woman. We had several long talks. The name, lawyer, hung in the air." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Brenda shifted uncomfortably. "And after consulting with Monica," I went on, my gaze unwavering, "I also made a few calls to my bank. And I made some significant changes to how my estate is structured. You see, the inheritance you were so clearly counting on, the one you're already making plans to simplify, well, it's no longer structured the way you assumed." The silence that followed was profound. David's jaw had gone slack. Sarah looked as though I'd struck her. Brenda's carefully constructed, pleasant expression had frozen. This was the moment, the culmination of weeks of secret planning, of quiet resolve. It wasn't a shout of triumph, but a calm, deliberate statement of fact. I had called the bank, indeed, and the lawyer, and I had, effectively, frozen them out of the future they had so confidently envisioned for themselves, a future built upon my demise and their unearned inheritance. The immediate reaction was a stunned, almost comical, disbelief. David was the first to find his voice, a strangled, incredulous sound. What are you talking about, Mom? What changes? The will? Arthur's will, our will, it's always been clear." He sounded like a child whose favorite toy had just been snatched away. Sarah stared at me, her face paling. You can't be serious. After everything? After all Dad did, after all we..." She trailed off, perhaps realizing the weakness of her argument. "After all you what, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "Assumed? Expected? Took for granted." I kept my voice calm, devoid of the triumph that was nevertheless singing quietly in my veins. "Arthur and I worked hard for everything we have. We were always clear that we wanted to provide for you, yes. But that provision was always predicated on the assumption of a loving, respectful, familial relationship. A relationship where a mother in distress could count on her children." Brenda, ever practical, cut to the chase. "What exactly did you do, Eleanor?" Her use of my first name, usually reserved for more informal, friendly moments, now sounded sharp, almost accusatory. "I established a revocable living trust," I explained, savoring each word. "All my significant assets, including this house, my savings, my investments, have been transferred into the Eleanor Vance Revocable Living Trust. I am the sole trustee. I retain full control during my lifetime." David was shaking his head, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. "A trust?
Why?"
What does that mean for us?" "It means, David," I said, meeting his gaze directly, "that upon my passing, the assets in the trust will be distributed according to the terms I have set forth. And those terms are rather different from what you might have anticipated." "Different how?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning fury. You couldn't cut us out completely. We're your children." "Oh, you're not cut out completely," I said, a touch of irony lacing my tone. "You will each receive a sum of $10,000. The amount, so paltry compared to their expectations, hung in the air like a bad joke." David actually let out a short, shocked laugh. 10,000? Mom, that's nothing. The house alone is worth. This is insane. You're being vindictive. Am I, David? I countered, my voice still even. Or am I merely reallocating my resources to those who have shown genuine care and concern, or to causes that Arthur and I held dear? The bulk of my estate will now go to the Havenwood Animal Sanctuary and to a nursing scholarship fund. And a portion will also go to Agnes Periwinkle, who, unlike my own children, was actually there for me when I needed help. The mention of Agnes, a mere neighbor, receiving what they considered their birthright, seemed to enrage Sarah. Agnes? You're leaving our money to a neighbor? This is a betrayal. After all we've done for you. Done for me. I raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me, Sarah. What exactly have you done for me lately, aside from plan my premature consignment to an assisted living facility and the sale of my home? Was it the ignored phone calls? The dismissive texts? The 15-minute hospital visit? The plans to simplify my assets for your convenience? My words, calm but laden with accusation, hit their mark. Their faces flushed with a mixture of shame and anger. They had no real defense, and they knew it. Brenda, however, tried a different tack. Eleanor, you must be upset. This health scare, it's understandable. But making such drastic decisions, perhaps you weren't thinking clearly. Oh, I assure you, Brenda, my thinking has never been clearer, I said, a steely edge to my voice. My lawyer, Miss Pritchard, can attest to my soundness of mind. We've been very thorough. Every I is dotted, every T is crossed. This is my decision, made with full knowledge and intent. David slumped back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. But my business plans, Sarah's renovations, we were counting on. We always assumed. His voice trailed off, his raw entitlement laid bare. They hadn't just hoped for an inheritance, they had incorporated it into their financial planning, as if it were already theirs. Assumptions can be costly, David, I said softly. You assumed my love was unconditional, regardless of your behavior. You assumed my resources were yours for the taking. You assumed I was too old, too frail, too tired to assert my own will. You assumed wrong on all counts. Sarah burst into tears then, not the soft, gentle tears of sorrow, but harsh, angry sobs. How could you do this to us, Mom? How could you be so cruel? Cruel? I looked at her, my heart aching not for her distress, but for the daughter I wished I had. Is it cruel to expect common decency from one's own children? Is it cruel to protect oneself from being treated as an inconvenience, a burden whose only remaining value lies in her estate? You call this cruel, Sarah? I call it a consequence. A consequence of your own actions. They stayed for another half hour, a blur of pleading, accusations, and insincere, panicked apologies. David vowed they'd change, they'd visit more, they'd do anything. Sarah wailed about how much they loved me, how this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But their words rang hollow, tainted by the raw avarice that had been so starkly revealed. I remained resolute, repeating calmly that my decision was made, the legal arrangements finalized. Eventually, defeated and visibly shaken, they left. The silence they left behind was different this time. It wasn't the lonely silence of neglect. It was the quiet, satisfying hum of reclaimed power. I had faced them, spoken my truth, and stood my ground. The inheritance they had taken for granted was, for all intents and purposes, frozen from their grasp. The real consequences were only just beginning to dawn on them. The days and weeks following that confrontation were, predictably, tumultuous, though the turmoil was largely on their side. David called repeatedly, his tone shifting from bewildered anger to pleading, then to a kind of wheedling manipulation. He spoke of his financial pressures, the needs of his children, my grandchildren, he pointedly reminded me, and how this decision would devastate their future. Mom, you can't do this to your own family. Think of Emily and James. What about their college funds? We were relying on that future security. His attempts to use the grandchildren as leverage were particularly distasteful. My provisions for them were, in fact, separate and modest, held in trust until they reached adulthood, something I didn't deign to explain to him at that moment. His focus was entirely on the vast sums he now realized he wouldn't be getting. Sarah, after her initial tearful outburst, adopted a strategy of wounded silence, punctuated by occasional guilt-inducing texts. I just don't understand how you could be so cold, Mom. My heart is broken. These messages were designed to make me feel like the villain, the unnatural mother. But the clarity I had gained was a sturdy shield. Their pain was not for the loss of a loving maternal relationship, but for the loss of anticipated wealth. Monica Pritchard had warned me to expect such reactions. "They will try everything, Mrs. Vance," she'd said. Anger, guilt, pity, even threats of legal action. "Stand firm. You are well within your rights, and your documents are sound." And indeed, David did consult the lawyer. I received a stiffly worded letter from a local attorney, questioning my capacity at the time of establishing the trust and hinting at undue influence, presumably by Agnes or even Monica. Monica handled it with swift professionalism, providing a concise rebuttal that included a summary from the geriatric specialist I had consulted at her suggestion, who had confirmed my full cognitive abilities. The challenge fizzled out almost before it began. Their lawyer likely advised them they had no real case. There were awkward encounters with other relatives. My sister, Carol, David, and Sarah's aunt, called, clearly prompted by them. "Eleanor, dear, I hear there's been some misunderstanding. David and Sarah are terribly upset. Perhaps you've been a bit hasty." I explained my reasons calmly to Carol, who, to her credit, listened without judgment and eventually conceded. "Well, I can see why you felt you had to do something, though it's a terribly sad state of affairs. The sad state of affairs was entirely of my children's making," a point I gently emphasized. But amidst this fallout, a profound sense of peace began to settle over me. The weight of their expectations, the unspoken pressure of their entitlement, had lifted. I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. My relationship with Agnes deepened. She had been discreetly supportive throughout the entire process, never prying but always ready with a cup of tea and a listening ear. When I finally told her about the provision I'd made for her in the trust, she was initially flustered, protesting that it was too much, unnecessary. "Nonsense, Agnes," I told her firmly. "True friendship and loyalty are priceless. This is just a small token of my gratitude for yours." She had tears in her eyes and hugged me tightly. It was a moment of genuine, unselfish affection that stood in stark contrast to my children's grasping demands. I also started volunteering at the Havenwood Animal Sanctuary twice a week. Arthur would have loved it. I helped with simple tasks, folding laundry, socializing with the cats, assisting with mailings. The unconditional affection of the animals, the dedication of the staff and volunteers, it was all incredibly therapeutic. I was contributing, making a difference, however small. My life was no longer about waiting for my children to call, waiting for them to visit, waiting, ultimately, for my life to end so theirs could be enhanced. Now my days had purpose. I found myself looking forward to my volunteer shifts, to my afternoons with Agnes, to simply pottering in my garden without the shadow of their future claims hanging over me. There was a touch of melancholy, of course. The dream of a close, loving family in my old age had died a painful death. I mourned the loss of the children I thought I had, the relationship I had always hoped for. But that grief was increasingly overshadowed by a quiet satisfaction. I had faced a profound betrayal, and instead of crumbling, I had found an inner strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had reclaimed my dignity, my autonomy, and control over my own legacy. The house felt different now. It was no longer just a valuable asset in their eyes, a future windfall. It was my home, mine to enjoy, filled with my memories and my choices. The quiet hum I had once yearned for was returning, not from the illusion of familial duty, but from the reality of a life lived authentically, on my own terms. The initial shockwaves from my decision were subsiding, leaving behind a new, clearer landscape. Years began to pass, not in a blur, but with a richness and texture I hadn't experienced since Arthur was alive. The initial storm of David and Sarah's indignation had long since blown itself out, leaving behind a strained and distant politeness. They called, infrequently, usually on holidays or my birthday. The conversations were stilted, carefully avoiding any mention of finances or the future. The genuine care clause in my trust remained unfulfilled. Their sporadic, brief visits, often laden with an undercurrent of resentment, didn't come close to meeting its conditions. David's business, which had apparently been relying on a significant infusion of anticipated inheritance, struggled. He had to downsize, sell a second property they'd overextended themselves on. Brenda's expensive tastes had to be curtailed. I heard whispers through my sister Carol that their marriage was under strain. Sarah and Mark had to postpone their grand kitchen renovation indefinitely. Their disappointment was a palpable thing, a cloud that seemed to follow them. They had built castles in the air, predicated on my demise and their entitlement, and those castles had crumbled. I took no pleasure in their difficulties, but I also felt no guilt. They were living with the direct consequences of their own attitudes and actions. For my part, life blossomed in unexpected ways. My involvement with Havenwood Animal Sanctuary grew. I eventually joined their board, using some of the financial acumen Arthur had taught me to help with their fundraising and strategic planning. The small nursing scholarship I had established saw its first recipients, bright, dedicated young students who wrote me heartfelt letters of gratitude. Knowing I was making a tangible difference in these young lives, and in the lives of the animals at the sanctuary, brought me a profound sense of fulfillment that no amount of forced familial obligation ever could. Agnes and I became true companions. We took short trips together, a visit to a renowned botanical garden, a week by the coast in a charming rented cottage. We shared meals, laughter, and the comfortable silences of old friends. Her presence was a constant reminder that true connection isn't always found where you expect it, and that chosen family can be as strong, if not stronger, than bonds of blood. The house, once a point of contention, became my sanctuary again. I hosted small gatherings for my new friends from the sanctuary, book club meetings, and quiet dinners with Agnes. I filled it with flowers from my garden and the comforting aroma of baking, something I hadn't done much of in recent years. I even adopted a senior cat from Havenwood, a quiet, affectionate tabby named Oliver, whose gentle purring was a constant source of comfort. He'd curl up on Arthur's armchair, now definitively mine, and I'd read, content in his presence. My health remained stable. Dr. Ramirez, pleased with my proactive approach to my well-being, often remarked on my vitality. "Whatever you're doing, Eleanor," she'd say with a smile, "keep doing it. You're thriving," and I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the aging mother, the future inheritance. I was Eleanor Vance, active community member, philanthropist, friend, and a woman in complete control of her own destiny. I had faced the painful truth about my children, processed the grief, and moved forward not with bitterness, but with a clear-eyed understanding of human nature. The vindication wasn't in their loss, but in my own gain, the reclamation of my peace, my purpose, and my self-worth. There were moments, fleeting and poignant, when I'd see a family laughing together, an elderly mother leaning on the arm of a devoted son or daughter, and a pang of what might have been would surface. But it was quickly followed by a sense of gratitude for the strength I'd found, the choices I'd made, and the genuine connections I had forged. My legacy would not be one of bitterness or squandered wealth. It would be one of care, compassion, and the quiet dignity of a life lived on its own terms. I had faced their neglect, their entitlement, and their profound disrespect, and I had not only survived, but I had flourished. The silence that once filled my house with fear and loneliness was now filled with the gentle hum of a life well and truly reclaimed. And that, I realized, was the sweetest vindication of all. Thank you for listening to my story. Please hit the subscribe button if you'd like to hear more, and I'll see you in the next video.